When my mother walked into my company's anniversary gala with a lawyer, more than 300 people were in the room. Clients, investors, hotel executives, wedding planners, and dozens of employees who had spent the last 9 years helping me build the company from almost nothing. That night, we had just announced plans to open our second large glass conservatory in upstate New York. The architectural renderings were still glowing on the screen behind the stage. My team had started pouring champagne. Reporters were waiting for interviews. Then my mother, Linda Bennett, walked onto the stage. She wore a pale gray suit and carried a blue legal folder. My younger sister, Brooke, followed behind her. So did an attorney I had never met. When I saw them, my first feeling was not anger. It was exhaustion. Because I knew this pattern. Whenever Brooke needed something, some part of my life suddenly became available for redistribution. When we were kids, it was my time. Later, it was my opportunities. Then it became my money. Now they wanted my company. My mother did not ask permission to go on stage. She took the microphone from the event host and said, "Before we continue tonight, there is something important that needs to be corrected." The ballroom slowly went quiet. I stood on the other side of the stage and watched her. She turned toward the audience. This company was built on family land and family assets. Under the arrangements, my mother, Evelyn, intended for our family, my younger daughter, Brooke, should hold a 40% interest in this business. A low murmur moved through the room. Brooke stood beside her. Her eyes were slightly red. Her expression was calm. She had always been good at that. Looking like someone who had been dragged into a difficult situation, instead of the person who helped create it. My mother continued. "We have formally filed a claim regarding ownership of the property and equity in the company. Until a court resolves the matter, I would encourage every investor in this room to think very carefully about the expansion announced tonight." Then she looked at me. I knew that look. I had first seen it when I was 24. It always meant the same thing. Now it's your turn to be reasonable. I did not grab the microphone from her. I did not ask security to remove her. I simply walked to the center of the stage. "Are you finished?" She frowned. "Nora, this is not something you should handle with that attitude." I asked if you were finished. The attorney stepped forward. "Ms. Bennett, our clients are still willing to discuss a private settlement." "I know." I nodded. "Your email yesterday was very clear. 40% of my company for Brooke, and $2 million. Then you dropped the lawsuit. The room became even quieter. Brooke's face changed. Apparently, she had not expected me to say the numbers out loud. My mother immediately said, "This is a family matter." I looked at her. "You just took a microphone and announced it to 300 people, and now it's private." No one laughed. By then, everyone could tell something was wrong. I picked up a presentation remote from the edge of the stage. I clicked once. The rendering of our new conservatory disappeared. A corporate registration record appeared. Then a real estate transfer. Then a bank payment history. My mother went still. I said, "Before we discuss Brooke owning 40% of my company, I think we should clear up one thing. This business was never built on land owned by you or Brooke. 9 years ago, when I came here, the old greenhouse property did belong to my grandmother. But 5 years ago, after an independent appraisal, she sold the land and every building on it to North Pine Holdings." I paused. "North Pine Holdings has one owner. Me." Brooke suddenly said, "Grandma signed that when she was already sick." I turned toward her. "No. She signed it during the same year she was still driving a tractor at 6 in the morning. A few people in the room laughed. I continued, "And it was not a gift. It was not an inheritance. It was not a secret transfer. It was a commercial sale. I paid a down payment. Then I made monthly payments under a 5-year seller financing agreement." She reported the income. I reported the purchase. The bank has records. The accountants have records. And you have records too. I looked directly at my mother. "Because 4 years ago, you emailed Grandma and asked why she had sold the greenhouse property to me. So the statement in your lawsuit that you only recently learned about the sale? That may be difficult to explain." The attorney turned toward her. I could tell from his face that she had not told him about that email. But even that was not the biggest problem that night. The biggest problem came with the next slide. I clicked again. A private investor deck appeared on the screen. The cover read, "Brooke Bennett Living, Privates Growth, Round." My sister stared at the screen. I said, "This is more interesting." Over the last year, Brooke's company raised $750,000 from 7 private investors. In this pitch deck, she states that she expects to acquire a partial interest in the Evelyn Glasshouse property. She also says she plans to convert part of this location into the flagship destination for her luxury wellness brand. In other words, you did not sue me because you suddenly remembered Grandma's estate. You told investors you owned part of this place first. You took their money. Then you came back and tried to make the story true. The ballroom went completely silent. My mother said, "Turn that off." I looked at her. 9 years ago, you also liked deciding when I was allowed to speak. Not this time. 9 years earlier, I was 24 years old. I was not a founder. I did not own land. I did not have investors waiting for me. I was an assistant designer at a high-end floral studio in Cleveland. The pay was not great. The hours were brutal. During wedding season, I would be at the flower market before 4 in the morning. I carried buckets, trimmed stems, built structures, and spent hours making thousands of flowers look like they had somehow appeared without effort. I loved the work. I really did. I had loved plants since I was a kid. My grandmother Evelyn owned an old commercial greenhouse property in the Hudson Valley. I spent a lot of summers there growing up. Other kids went swimming. I followed Grandma around clipping roses, cleaning drainage channels, and sorting seed packets. She never made me stand back because I was a girl. She would hand me the pruning shears. If you cut the wrong branch, it grows again. She said that all the time. Maybe that was why I was never quite as afraid of starting over as the rest of my family. At home, though, I had a completely different role. Brooke was 2 years younger than I was. She had always been sensitive. She worried about teachers being upset with her, friends not liking her. Failing at something in public by high school, she had real anxiety. I'm not saying she made it up. She really struggled. She had panic symptoms. She had nights when she could not sleep. She needed therapy. The problem was never that Brooke had anxiety. The problem was that eventually everything in our family had to revolve around her anxiety. If I had an exam the next morning and Brooke could not sleep, I was expected to stay up talking to her. If I had a weekend shift and Brooke had a fight with her boyfriend, I was expected to call out and come home. If I won something and Brooke was having a bad week at school, my mother would say, "Maybe don't mention it in front of her yet." When I was younger, I did not think of it as unfair. I honestly believed I was the stable one. I could wait. I could celebrate later. I could handle my own feelings. Brooke needed more help. My father, Gary, had one favorite sentence: "Nora will be fine." It sounded like confidence in me. Years later, I understood how dangerous that sentence had become. When a family decides one child will always be fine, they start handing that child everything that is not fine. When I was 24, I finally got a chance that could have changed my career. The National Botanical Design Showcase, every year, only 24 emerging designers were selected. It was not a simple flower arranging competition. Each designer had to create a complete environment: plants, structures, lighting, table design, guest flow. Budget. If your work stood out, major wedding studios, hotel groups, and event companies paid attention. I spent 8 months preparing. My concept was called After Rain. I built it around memories of my grandmother's glasshouses after summer storms, when water ran down the old panes and every leaf looked darker and brighter at the same time. I saved $4,800 myself. Registration, materials, travel, hotel, everything. My boss gave me 5 days off. I was ready. At the time, I had been dating Ryan Cole for 3 years. He knew what the showcase meant to me. We had even talked about what would happen if I got an offer in New York or Chicago. He said he would move with me. I believed him. 2 days before I was supposed to leave, Brooke's fiancé ended their engagement. They had only been engaged 4 months. They had barely started planning the wedding, but Brooke completely fell apart. She called me at 2 in the morning. She cried so hard I could barely understand her. She said her future was gone. She said everyone was going to laugh at her. I drove to my parents' house and stayed with her for 3 hours. I got back to my apartment after 6 in the morning. That night, my mother called me. "You can't go to Chicago tomorrow." I thought I had heard her wrong. What? Brooke is in really bad shape. I know. I sat with her until 5 this morning. That's not enough. She can't be alone. You and Dad are there. She doesn't want us. She wants you. I stood in my kitchen. Mom, my competition starts the day after tomorrow. I know. Then why are you telling me not to go? Her voice tightened. Nora, there will be other opportunities. Brooke is really struggling right now. For once, I did not immediately give in. Then she needs to see her therapist. She has a therapist. She has you. She has Dad. I am not canceling this. My mother went cold. So a competition is more important than your sister? No. Then why can't you stay? Because she is hurting, and that does not mean my life has to stop. The second the words left my mouth, I surprised myself. For 24 years, I had almost never spoken to my mother that way. She hung up. Ryan came over that night. He already knew. I could tell from his face that my mother had called him. He said, "Brooke really is in bad shape." I said nothing. "This showcase happens next year too, right?" "Yes." "Then go next year." I stared at him. "You know how long I've prepared for this." "I know." "Then why are you talking about it like I can exchange the date on a movie ticket?" He sighed. "I just think sometimes family matters more than work." "Yes," I nodded. "But why is it always my work that matters less?" He had no answer. The next morning at 9, I received an email from the showcase. The subject line said, "Withdrawal confirmation." I did not understand. I opened it. It said that based on the phone call received that morning, and because of my family medical emergency, they were sorry to confirm my withdrawal. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands shaking. I had not called anyone. I contacted the organizers immediately. The woman I spoke to sounded confused. She said a woman claiming to be my mother had called. She knew my registration number. She knew my date of birth. She said my sister was experiencing a serious mental health emergency and that I could not leave Ohio. Worse, my place had already been given to an alternate. They could not restore it. I drove to my parents' house. My mother was in the kitchen making soup. Brooke sat at the table. Ryan was there too. I did not even raise my voice. "You called them?" My mother pretended not to understand. "Called who?" "The showcase." She paused. Then she said, "I took care of it for you." That was it. "I took care of it for you." Like she had canceled a dentist appointment. I asked, "How did you get my registration number?" She did not answer. Brooke looked down. I understood immediately. "You gave it to her?" Brooke started crying. "I just told her where your paperwork was." "I didn't tell her to cancel you, but you knew she was going to." "I didn't." "You did." She cried harder. My father walked into the kitchen. He took one look at the room and said, "Nora, don't upset your sister right now." I actually laughed. My mother had just impersonated me and canceled the biggest professional opportunity of my life. And my father was worried that I might make Brooke uncomfortable. I looked at Ryan. "What about you?" His face looked awful. "I don't think your mother should have called." I waited. Of course there was more. But it already happened. Don't blow up your entire family over this. In that moment, I could suddenly see the next 10 years of my life. If I stayed, this was what it would always be. Someone would hurt me, then everyone else would expect me to fix the emotional atmosphere afterward. I went back to my apartment, packed clothes, tools, 2 boxes of books, and the materials left over from my showcase model. That evening, I drove 7 hours to the Hudson Valley. My grandmother opened the greenhouse office door close to midnight. My eyes were swollen. I had 2 suitcases beside me. She did not ask, "What happened with your mother?" She looked at the bags and said, "The guest room sheets are in the second cabinet. Are you hungry?" I almost cried right there. Grandma's greenhouse was not exactly a dream waiting for me. It was closer to a disaster. There were 6 greenhouses on 12 acres. 3 still worked properly. 1 leaked cold air every winter. 2 had so many broken panes that parts of them were unusable. The main glasshouse had been built in the 1930s. It was beautiful. It also looked like one hard winter could finish it off. Evelyn was in her 70s. She could not physically do everything anymore. The next morning at 6, she knocked on my door. "If you're staying here, you're working." "Okay." She tossed me a pair of thick work gloves. "Start with the drainage channels." That was my new beginning. No inspirational music. No investor suddenly showing up with a check. The first year was hard. I cleaned up the bookkeeping. We shut down 2 growing areas that had been losing money for years. I started taking small wedding floral jobs. On weekends, we rented part of the main glasshouse to photographers. We repainted old tables ourselves, hung our own string lights. Some nights, a wedding ended at 1 in the morning. At 5:30, I still had to get up and process flowers for the next event. That was around the time I met Miles Carter. After a severe ice storm damaged part of the main greenhouse, the county required a structural inspection. Miles was a restoration engineer who specialized in historic buildings. The first time he walked in, he looked up for less than 2 minutes. The southwest corner needs to close. I immediately disliked him. We have a wedding Saturday. Move the wedding. Do you know what that costs? Yes. Then why are you saying it like it's nothing? He looked at me. Because if that beam comes down, money will be the smallest problem you have. I disliked him for about 3 days. Then he gave me the full report. I expected one terrifying repair estimate that would shut us down. Instead, he had created 3 plans: the full restoration, a mid-range phased repair, and a minimum safe option we could complete over 6 months. He said, "I know you don't have enough cash to do everything now. But the safety line is not negotiable. The rest can happen in stages." I asked, "How do you know we don't have enough cash?" He pointed toward a blue tarp on the roof. "Because if you had money, that wouldn't still be up there after 3 years." I laughed before I could stop myself. That was the first time we really talked. Miles later helped us apply for a historic preservation grant. I asked what he charged. He quoted his normal fee. That actually made me trust him more. By then, I had become suspicious whenever someone said, "Don't worry about paying me," because too often "you don't owe me" eventually turned into a different kind of debt. During our second year, we landed our first truly major wedding. The daughter of a regional hotel executive wanted the ceremony in our glasshouse. The budget was $180,000. If we did it well, it could move us into a completely different market. 6 days before the wedding, state agriculture inspectors arrived. Someone had reported that we were using an unapproved imported chemical treatment on floral materials. The inspectors even had a laboratory report. Our inventory was temporarily held. I stood in the storage building and, for the first time, genuinely thought the company might die. The allegation turned out to be false. The chemical was not there. The laboratory listed on the report did not even exist. But the wedding was still 6 days away. Miles helped me find a temporary structural crew. We moved the main event setup into another glasshouse. Our staff worked more than 30 hours almost without stopping. The wedding happened. The bride posted photos the next day. A local magazine picked them up. Ironically, the attempted shutdown became the first thing that made our work go viral. 3 months later, an old supplier mentioned that the complaint email had come from a domain previously used by Brooke's public relations assistant. I did not have enough evidence to make a legal accusation, so I did not confront her. But I knew, and that was when I finally accepted something else. My family did not just want me to leave. They wanted me to fail after I left, because if I succeeded, then leaving them might have been the right decision, and that was the part they could not tolerate. Over the next few years, the business changed completely. We expanded from floral work into full event design and venue operations. I named the company Evelyn House, not because my grandmother handed me a business. Actually, she charged me rent every month. Once, I asked to delay the rent by 2 weeks. She sent me a late notice. I said, "You can't give your granddaughter a little flexibility?" She said, "As your grandmother, yes. As the owner of the business you're renting from, no." That was Evelyn. She loved me, but she did not mix love with responsibility. The older I got, the more I understood how healthy that was. By our 5th year, Evelyn House had more than 30 full-time employees. Weddings booked a year in advance. We were working with hotels, restaurants, and corporate brands. That was when my mother called. We had not had a real conversation in 4 years. She sounded soft. "We miss you." I still went to dinner. I know how that sounds, but no matter how old you get, there can still be a child inside you who thinks, maybe this time my mother really does just want to see me. For the first 45 minutes, everything felt normal. My father asked about work. My mother said the greenhouse photos were beautiful. Brooke even said, "I always knew you'd do well." I almost believed them. Then dessert had not even arrived when my mother placed a folder on the table. I knew immediately. Nothing had changed. Brooke was launching a luxury women's wellness company called Bloom Ritual. She had rented office space, hired employees, paid for a photo shoot. The only problem was money. The bank had rejected her request for a $300,000 credit line, so my family had come up with another plan. They wanted Evelyn House to guarantee the loan. My mother said, "Your company brings in this kind of money now. $300,000 is not a big deal for you." I looked at Brooke. "How much debt do you have?" Her expression changed. "It's not debt, it's expansion." "What's your current cash flow?" Nobody answered. I opened the plan. It took me less than 10 minutes to understand the problem. In the last 11 months, Brooke's company had earned less than $90,000. Her advertising and office expenses had already exceeded $240,000. She was not expanding. She was burning cash. I closed the folder. No, my mother stared at me. You're not even going to think about it? I did. Nora, this is your sister. I know. We're family. I looked at her. We were family 4 years ago when you impersonated me and canceled my showcase too. The whole table went quiet. My father said, "Why are you still talking about that?" I turned toward him. "Because none of you ever dealt with it. You just waited for me to stop bringing it up." I stood. My mother grabbed my wrist. "We raised you for more than 20 years. Now you're successful. What is wrong with helping your family?" I looked down at her hand. "Let go." She did not. I said it again. "Let go." Finally, she released me. I walked out of the restaurant. Miles came to the greenhouse that night. We had been together for 2 years by then. He did not ask, "Why did you even go meet them?" That mattered. He only asked, "What happened?" I told him. Then I said, "Am I stupid? I knew what they were like and I still hoped." Miles shook his head. "Wanting your parents to love you is not stupid. Letting that hope keep giving them access to hurt you is something worth looking at." I remembered that. 6 months later, Grandma's health began to decline more quickly. Her heart function was getting worse. She moved more slowly. One afternoon, she called me into the office and pushed a thick folder toward me. "Read it." It was a real estate purchase agreement. Years earlier, when the business had first become stable, Grandma had ordered an independent appraisal on the 12-acre greenhouse property. North Pine Holdings, a company I created, had purchased it. I paid a down payment. The rest was financed directly by Grandma over 5 years. Every month, my company automatically paid her. I knew I had been making payments, but in my mind, I had thought of the deal mostly as purchasing operating rights in the buildings I used. I had never really focused on how complete the transfer was. The agreement was clear: the land, all 6 greenhouses, the warehouse, the office building. Title had been transferred 5 years earlier. I looked at Grandma. "Why didn't you explain all of this to me?" "Explain what? This was your biggest asset. You sold all of it to me? I sold it? I didn't give it to you. You make a payment every month, don't you?" "Yes." "Then what is the problem?" I laughed. That was Evelyn. Even when she did something deeply meaningful, she refused to frame it like a sacrifice. Then she pulled a stack of printed emails from a drawer. "There's more." They were from my mother. 4 years earlier, right after the company began doing well. My mother already knew about the sale. She had been furious. One email said, "You are giving Nora something that should belong to both girls." Grandma replied, "I am not giving her anything. She is buying a business you never wanted until it became valuable." I read that email very quietly. I had no idea how important it would become later. Grandma's health continued to decline during her final year. I handed more work to my team. I took her to doctor appointments, cooked for her, sat with her in the main glass house most evenings. The last time she was fully alert enough to talk about the company, she said, "Your mother will come back." I know. She won't think she's stealing. She'll believe she's taking something that was always supposed to be hers. I asked, "Are you scared?" "Me?" She laughed. "I'm almost dead. What am I scared of?" Then she looked at me. "What about you?" I thought for a moment. "I used to be. Not as much anymore." She nodded. "Good. Evelyn died during the winter when I was 32. The funeral was small. My mother cried the hardest. Brooke came too. So did Ryan. Yes, Ryan. I had not seen him in years. I later learned that about a year after I left, he started helping Brooke with social media projects. They were never officially together, but he remained close to my family. When he saw me at the funeral, he only said, "I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded. "Thank you." That was all. Some people become so distant after you truly move on that seeing them again feels like recognizing a name from an old address book. The day after the funeral, my mother came to see me. She brought an old will Grandma had written more than 10 years earlier. It did say that her remaining family assets would eventually be divided equally between her 2 daughters. My mother believed that meant she had a right to half the greenhouse property. I told her the land was sold years ago. She said, "That transaction was not valid." Why? She was old. You took advantage of her. I stared at my mother. That may have been the thing that made me angriest in the entire situation. I was the one who had spent Grandma's last years with her. They were not there, and now because they wanted property, the first thing they did was describe her as an old woman who could not make her own decisions. A week later I was served. My mother and Brooke wanted the court to void the 5-year-old sale. They also argued that because Evelyn House had grown using original family assets, Brooke was entitled to part of the company's value. At first I could not understand why Brooke was personally involved in the lawsuit. Then my attorney found the reason. Over the previous year, Brooke had raised $750,000 from private investors. Her investor materials said Bloom Ritual expected to acquire a partial interest in the Evelyn House real estate. The deck also claimed her family would provide an existing luxury glasshouse property for the company's first wellness retreat center. She had already raised money using land she did not own, so they had to win. This was no longer about Grandma, or fairness. If they lost, Brooke's investors would discover she had made promises she could not support. And then there was Ryan. He had helped create the early version of Brooke's investor plan. My attorney asked if I wanted him investigated more aggressively. I said, "Follow the facts. Do not dig deeper just because I know him." The facts found him anyway. Ryan had not forged any title records, but in one email he asked Brooke, "Are you sure your family controls the property?" Brooke replied, "My mom says Grandma's old sale can be challenged. Once she dies, it will come back to us." Ryan saw that and still helped her continue preparing investor materials. 9 years earlier, he had told me, "It already happened. Don't destroy the family over it." 9 years later, he was still the same person. As long as the truth made life uncomfortable, he was willing to live with a more convenient version. When Miles learned about the lawsuit, he asked, "What do you want?" "To win," he smiled. "That is very clear. But I don't want to destroy Brooke." "Then don't define winning as destroying her." I looked at him. "How do I define it?" "Keep what belongs to you, and let the consequences that belong to her stay with her." That became the center of my strategy. I did not leak family messages to reporters. I did not post long statements online. I did not try to embarrass them publicly. We did what the case required. Independent appraisals, bank transfers, Grandma's medical records from the year of the sale, attorney meeting notes, 5 years of payment history, tax records, and most importantly, the email proving my mother had known about the sale 4 years earlier. Her claim that she had only recently discovered Grandma had been taken advantage of did not survive very long. But as the case started turning against them, they became more desperate. The day before our company anniversary gala, my attorney received a settlement demand. Give Brooke 40% of Evelyn House. Pay $2 million. They would drop the suit if I refused. They planned to appear publicly and tell our investors that title to our main property was under serious legal dispute. I did not respond. So the next night they came, and that was how we ended up back on the stage. 300 people. My mother with a microphone, Brooke with her attorney, and me standing in front of the company I had built. I showed the room the property sale, the payment history, my mother's 4-year-old email acknowledging the deal, then Brooke's investor deck promising future ownership in the property. I did not show private family texts. I did not play videos of Brooke crying. I did not need to humiliate her. The documents were enough. Brooke suddenly took the microphone. "I only believed what Mom told me." I looked at her. "When you accepted $750,000, were you only believing Mom then too?" She could not answer. My mother rushed toward me. "Nora, you just want to destroy your sister." I shook my head. "No. If I wanted to destroy her, I would have sent all of this to the press 2 months ago. I am doing one thing. I am refusing to let her use my company to fill a hole she created herself." My father had been standing near the back for the first time that night. He walked toward the stage. "Nora, let's go home and talk." I looked at him. 9 years ago when Mom canceled my competition, what did you say?" His face tightened. I answered for him. "You told me not to upset Brooke." When we later found out the greenhouse complaint was connected to someone in her circle, you said we shouldn't destroy the family without absolute proof. When they wanted me to guarantee the $300,000 loan, you said that kind of money was not a big deal for me anymore. When Grandma died, you stood there while they accused me of exploiting an old woman. Dad, Every single time you knew someone was hurting me, you just did not want to pay the emotional price of stopping them. He started crying. I was wrong. Maybe. I looked at him. But tonight, I am not responsible for making you feel better about that. The event did not collapse. Our new investors did not pull out. They had already reviewed an independent title report before the gala. My mother believed causing a scene would scare them. Instead, she gave everyone in the room a perfect demonstration of why our corporate governance documents had unusually strict restrictions on transactions involving my relatives. 3 months later, the lawsuit was dismissed. The court confirmed the 5-year-old sale was valid. The purchase price had been independently appraised. Grandma had full legal capacity when she signed. I had made the payments exactly as required, and most damaging to my mother's claim, she had known about the sale for years. Brooke's problems were only beginning. Her investors demanded a full review of how their money had been used. She ultimately returned most of the unspent capital. She gave up the office lease. Bloom Ritual shut down. She did not go to prison. She did not lose everything overnight. Real life was less dramatic than that. She simply had to face something for the first time. What do you do when a business fails and there is no sister to save it? No parent willing to write another check? No family property that magically becomes yours? Ryan called me once. He said, I should have asked more questions. Yes. And back then I shouldn't have? Yes. He went quiet. Then he asked, Are you ever going to forgive me? I thought about it. Ryan, I stopped needing your forgiveness conversation a long time ago. He did not understand what I meant. I did not explain. Not every old relationship needs a perfectly complete ending. Sometimes the ending is simply that you no longer need to keep talking. My mother did not contact me for almost a year. My father sent occasional messages. I did not answer all of them. Brooke became much quieter. 8 months later, a box arrived. Inside was the scale model I had built for the National Botanical Design Showcase when I was 24. I thought it had been thrown away years ago. Some parts were damaged. One of the glass sections was cracked. There was a note inside. Brooke wrote. I knew Mom was going to call them. I kept telling myself it wasn't my fault because I didn't make the call. That was a lie. Then you lost something because I wanted you available to carry me. I'm sorry. She did not ask me to respond. I didn't, but I repaired the model, and I put it in my office. Not to remind myself of what they did to me, to remind myself of something else. Someone else can cancel an opportunity. That does not mean they can cancel your entire future. During all of this, Miles stayed beside me, but he never said, see? If all that bad stuff had not happened, you never would have met me. I hated that kind of thinking. Pain does not need to be turned into a gift to make your life meaningful. One night I asked him, Do you ever think about the fact that if I had actually gone to Chicago at 24, I might never have come here? Of course. Doesn't that make you wish it happened this way? He thought for a moment. I'm happy I know you now, but I would never wish that younger version of you had to be hurt by everyone just so I could meet you later. I sat there without saying anything. It may have been the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. Not destiny. Not everything happens for a reason, just, I love who you are now. And I still wish who you were then had suffered less. In our 6th year together, Miles proposed. There were not 2,000 flowers in the greenhouse. No photographer. No surprise party. That afternoon, we had just finished a budget meeting. I was in a terrible mood because the new project was over budget. We went home. He made pasta. Halfway through dinner, he said, I have a question. If this is still about the budget, ask me tomorrow. It's not about the budget. He took out a small box. I looked at him. The first thing he said was, You do not have to answer tonight. I laughed. Do men take a class where they learn that sentence now? No. This is my risk management strategy. I laughed again. Then he said, I want to marry you, but I do not want to absorb your life into mine. I want us to remain two complete people, and then decide what we actually want to build together. My eyes filled with tears, not because of the ring, because I finally understood something. When I was younger, I thought love was mostly about whether someone would take my side. Later, I learned there was another question that mattered just as much. When someone loves you, do they still understand that your life belongs to you? I did not answer immediately. I said, Give me a day. He said, Okay. The next morning at 6, Miles was still asleep. I set a cup of coffee beside the bed and woke him. He opened one eye. Did the greenhouse collapse? No. Did a client cancel? No. Then why are you waking me up at 6? I placed the ring box on his chest. Now you can ask me again. He smiled. Nora Bennett, will you marry me? Yes. We got married at Evelyn House in the main glass house. A little over 60 people. Employees, friends, some of Grandma's old customers. My father came. My mother did not. She said she was not ready. I did not persuade her. Brooke came too. She was not a bridesmaid. She did not give a speech. Before the ceremony started, she stood at the entrance and asked, "Can I come in?" I looked at her. For most of our lives, Brooke had never asked. She had simply assumed my time, my opportunities, my emotions, and my space would move aside when she needed them. I said, "Yes." She nodded. Then she walked inside. She did not try to become part of the attention. After the ceremony, she came over. "Can I hug you?" I paused. Yes. The hug was short. No dramatic crying. No promise that we were best friends again. We weren't. Repairing a relationship is not like a movie. One apology does not erase every crack. Now, Brooke and I have dinner sometimes. We talk about Dad's health. We text around holidays. Sometimes 3 months go by and we do not speak. I do not know whether we will ever become very close again. I do not need to know. What matters is that she finally understands something. Being born into my family did not give her permanent access to every part of my life. And I finally understand that boundaries do not make me cruel. After our 9th anniversary, Evelyn House completed the second glass conservatory. The new project was not built on family property, it was not funded by Grandma, the company financed it, bought the land, built the structure. On opening morning, I stood alone in the new main hall. Sunlight came through the glass ceiling. The staff had not arrived yet. The room was completely quiet. I thought about myself at 24. Back then, I believed one phone call had destroyed my future. The showcase was gone. My boyfriend had not stood beside me. My family believed I should continue being the reasonable one. When I drove away, I had no idea what came next. Looking back now, the thing I am most grateful for is not the money I eventually made. It is not winning the lawsuit. It is not everyone finally learning what my mother did. It is that I did not start believing their version of my value. Someone can cancel a competition. They can take an opportunity from you. They can delay the route you thought you were going to take. But if they do not convince you that you do not deserve your own life, the story is not over. I used to think being the strong one in a family was a good thing. Now I think it depends. If everyone uses your strength as proof that you should sacrifice more, that is not admiration. They have simply found the person least likely to fight back. Real love should not work that way. Your family can need you. Your partner can ask for help. Your sister can have a breakdown. Your parents can be disappointed, but somebody else's feelings do not automatically become your responsibility. Miles needs me sometimes. I need him too. But we learn to ask each other something simple. Do you have the capacity for this right now? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is, not today. Then the other person finds another way to handle it. That may not sound romantic, but to me it is more reliable than someone saying, "I'll always solve everything for you." Because healthy love is not, "I give you my boundaries to prove I trust you." Healthy love is, "I know you have boundaries, so every time I come closer, I respect them." My mother used to tell me, "You're stronger." So the showcase could wait. Brooke needed me more. Later they said, "Your company is successful now, so using some of it to rescue Brooke should not matter." Then eventually they started treating Grandma's land, my company, and my future, like everything could be divided again as long as they put the word family in front of it. Now I know better. Family is not a permanent authorization form. Love is not one either. You can love someone and still remain your own person. You can help your family and still say no. You can understand somebody's pain without taking responsibility for the consequences of their choices. And someone who truly loves you will not question your love just because you refuse to sacrifice yourself. At 24, I lost one competition. At 33, I stood in the center of my second glass conservatory. And suddenly, those two places did not feel as far apart as they once had. Between them were thousands of ordinary days, waking up early, working, failing, rewriting budgets, replanting, redesigning, trying again, believing myself again. People like to ask, "When did your life really change?" They expect the answer to be the first big contract, winning the lawsuit, meeting Miles, or Grandma selling me the property. It was none of those. My life changed the morning I opened that withdrawal email. For the first time, my first question was not, how do I make my family happy again? It was, why does everyone think they are allowed to cancel my life without my permission? Once I asked that question, a lot of things could never go back to the way they were, and now I am grateful for that, because I finally learned something very simple. Someone loving you does not mean they own you. Someone needing you does not mean you must sacrifice yourself. Someone being disappointed in you does not mean you did something wrong. Healthy, adult love, whether it comes from family or a partner, should always leave room for one sentence. This is my life. Let me decide.